Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Tonight, Rudy Giuliani facing even more heat as newly released testimony puts him at the center of this Ukraine scandal. People slamming his campaign of lies and incorrect information. Testimony that it was clear Giuliani had influence on the president about Ukraine. All this comes as Giuliani faces a criminal investigation and is lawyering up, adding 3 new members to his team, including Robert Costello, who at one time was his intern at the SDNY. It's a lot of heat. Giuliani is at the center now, of course, of 2 probes. Here's a simple way to measure the pressure on the impeachment side of the probe. Only a minority of depositions have been released thus far, and Giuliani's already cited over 430 times. It's a lot. How is he responding? Well, he's claimed everything that he did was to defend his client, Donald Trump, a line he was using on TV back when he did TV interviews.
Why am I doing it, Laura? Can't you figure it out? I'm his defense lawyer. I was seeking, in the best tradition of being a lawyer, a defense lawyer, to vindicate my client. It's in the best interest of my client to unravel the corruption in the Ukraine.
We are back with former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. You're scratching your head, and a lot of people are scratching their head in America right now, right?
You caught me there, Ari.
Well, good. That's good. That's all you were doing. It's a metaphor for how we try to understand what the heck is going on with Mr. Giuliani. As I reported, he went from saying he doesn't need a lawyer to hiring 3 and being cited constantly in this impeachment probe. What's happening?
It really seems like Giuliani has got so much criminal exposure potentially. When you see the Parnazes and the Frumans of the world getting locked up, those are charges that had to be approved or at least not stopped by AG Barr. So that tells me Barr may be willing to go so far in helping the president, but maybe not all the way. So when we heard reported, Ari, that Parnas is now saying he is inclined to talk with some of the House committees, that to me sure looks like a step on the road to possible cooperation. I have to say that if Rudy Giuliani is not charged, it's sure going to smell like Barr putting his thumb on the scales. And we'll have to see how far Barr is willing to go.
Yeah. Well, and I would say we just don't know if we're there yet. We have to see all the evidence and what happens. I would note the U.S. Attorney in New York here, Mr. Berman, has really been aggressive in every case he's come up against, even those with pressure. Whether you look at the Michael Cohen case or Jeffrey Epstein, people remember it for the suspicious death in custody, which was under the Federal Bureau of Prisons. But that case was brought, even with whatever headache for the Trump administration, Mr. Avenatti, and now the investigation into Giuliani ongoing. I want to ask you about something that's not specific to Giuliani but relates, which is, do you find that lawyers make for good clients or difficult clients?
So I was a prosecutor for 30 years. I never had a client other than the community and the American people. But I have to believe lawyers make lousy clients because they are going to want to second guess.
I think lawyers make tough clients. Doctors notoriously make difficult patients. And so that's not just Giuliani, on top of the reasons why I think viewers know he might make an extra difficult client. Reading to you from his reporting on his search for attorneys, spent weeks, even though he knows all the lawyers in New York at his level, finding a lawyer who would represent Giuliani. 4 prominent attorneys reportedly declining for various reasons. Lawyers concerned Giuliani, known to have difficulty delegating, would try to manage his own case. Glenn.
Yeah, that, and I wonder how much money Rudy Giuliani has in reserve to pay his lawyers. Because let me tell you, the kind of lawyers who are going to contemplate taking on Rudy Giuliani as a client are not going to do it on the cheap. So that, may be some of the behind-the-scenes concerns that some of these lawyers have before wading into the sort of, defense of Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah, and that goes to something else, which is if Giuliani's defense is even partially true, and he took these actions on behalf of Donald Trump or Donald Trump's personal interest, Giuliani's not a government attorney, then he did a lot of pro bono work for Trump that's now costing him a lot of money.
Yeah, sorry, I'm losing you here a little bit.
It wasn't, what I said wasn't that important.
No, here's the thing. I heard most of what you said.
I know how it is with audio. That's on us. You give us your final thought, big picture.
Final thoughts are, if Rudy Giuliani is charged, there's nowhere to go but up. And I have to believe, rather than running the risk of ending up in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, where he put so many people when he was a U.S. attorney, he's going to sing.
It is Friday, the 8th of November of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, the French 77s have been virtually prepared for your virtual imbibing pleasure. If you happen to mix one up or two in the analog world, do take care. Always have a friend nearby. When you tipple, you may topple. So this is the most balanced cocktail in the history of cocktails. And you might not know how much you have imbibed in. And I would suggest no more than two. Even two might be too many. Nonetheless, we've made it to Friday, which means that we get to gird our loins for the weekend. Oh, what's going to happen then? Because it all comes down on Fridays and sometimes even on Saturday. So I'm awaiting. Of course, next week is going to be big because on Wednesday, that's when the televised impeachment hearings begin. Trump being such a television person, I love the fact that Nancy is trolling him. I mean, since he wanted to have the president of Ukraine get up in front of a camera and microphones and just say Biden, Hillary, and what was the other thing? Oh, yeah, no bribery or whatever. Just to, smear them by simply mentioning their names on TV. Because that's all it takes to trigger the lizard brains of his sycophantic followers, indeed. So we got that going for us, which is nice. Some of the Trump bros don't believe that these impeachment hearings have any validity, and if they even do, they won't have much import, especially since Bill Barr's on the job, and he's got an investigation into the investigators. Even though he said he wouldn't go in front of a band of microphones and a slew of TV cameras, I'll get it out, to affirm in Trump's language that he was innocent, he had nothing to do with it, he's been exonerated, and Barr would not do that. And some people are speculating maybe this is showing some kind of spine in Barr. I would say no, it's not showing any sort of spine. There's no ethical standards here that this guy is going to adhere to. No, he's a pragmatist. Trump always is a little quick on the draw. Before they're even able to put their little program into effect, Trump is out there touting the program. And then everybody's got to scramble and they lose a few steps. And Barr's not going to do that anymore. He's got a plan in place. It's working. Trump wants to go out there and tout some sort of great success with it before it's really begun, in Barr's mind. So Barr is not showing some sort of fealty to the institutions and to the protocols of what our government is. This is a bald-faced grab of power. And he's riding the dragon. Okay? They got a dragon by the tail. in Donald J. Trump. And they're going to ride that mofo. Hell, Trump already is appointed, a quarter? One in four? Is that what it is? I got to look at the Washington Gov page again. 1 in 4 in the judiciary. This is just the regular district courts. I mean, we're talking court packing here. And no one has any idea that it's going on. And if they do, no one is talking about it because of all the other things that are going on. So this is disaster capitalism. This is the shock doctrine. We have a tragedy, a spectacle, and the usual suspects are going to ram through their programs, and we'll be saddled with them for generations. Look at the incompetent people they're putting on the judiciary right this very moment. Okay, it's because they love America so much, huh? Well, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, at the top, now that Rudy Giuliani has hired 3 criminal defense lawyers, he's going to sing rather than running the risk of ending up in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Then on the rest of the menu, Georgia is sued over their absentee ballot law that could disenfranchise tens of thousands of voters in 2020. The Trump administration ignored career State Department officials' warnings about ending refugee protections. And the White House is urging private industry to modernize the national parks with a vision of food trucks, Wi-Fi, and Amazon drone deliveries. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where an international grand committee called for a pause on online micro-targeted political ads with false information until that area is regulated. And the EU criticized Russia for shutting down the second indigenous peoples' rights group in less than a week. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page, deftly located by Superior Graphic Design, and we always thank Tom for that, because it is deftly located right there with the social media scroll, is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, equally located with deft precision, is our Patreon link. And do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. Bills keep going up, and they already have again. And your generosity, a recurring contribution to Netroots Radio, that generosity has allowed us to continue broadcasting 24/7, 365 for the last 8 years plus. And it doesn't take much, as Tom has said before. You know, how about the cost of a espresso-type coffee drink sent our way once a month? And that really, truly, and all kidding aside, that helps us tremendously. And we thank you for that great generosity. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at CookbookWest. Tom takes care of that also. Thank you, Tom. He's a hard worker. Plus, he has his own real life and family to deal with. Jeez. Thank you, Tom. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, do so at Justice Putnam. And I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. And then get that out on social media for your social media pleasure. Follow the show on Twitter at CookbookWest and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, a couple of notes here at the top. Apparently, in some areas, this salon, this radio show, is confusing. Some people actually think it's a restaurant. Well, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy did actually exist as a real cafe and salon. And I put the emphasis on salon because that is where people go in the old French way of sitting around, having a cocktail or two and talking it out, having fun. That's what we do. So I guess it's confusing. It's a bit of a conceit. I'm a professional chef, as those of you who have been listening know, and I wanted to mix up the culinary with the political, anthropology and sociology, history, literature, art, all of those things in which we would be discussing in a salon. So I apologize for the confusion. I just thought it was cute. I did. And another note here, some really quite disturbing news, actually. I tried bringing this up with people, and I was shot down soundly as being one of those California socialists, even though I was born in Eugene. My son was born in Salem. My grandkids live in Salem. I went to school at Portland. Apparently because of my, care for our community and society. Apparently I'm an outsider in that. Well, what has happened is that a local Grange in a small little town had to cancel their yearly pancake breakfast because a group of Nazis who were exposed trying to take over a local growers fair, a farmer's market, were kicked out of that farmer's market, and now they're taking it out on the community with guns. So this local Grange was threatened, the little village town of Williams, by the way, and they had to cancel their pancake breakfast because that's the day when all the kids are coming, and these Nazis have decided they're armed, and they get to determine what polite conversation is. Now, this group is not an unknown entity. They have been exposed before, and people chose to ignore it. I brought it up when there was a kerfuffle here in town about some high school kids in the high school photo flashing the Pepe sign. But that was just something independent of anything to do with white nationalism and neo-Nazism, and it was just a coincidence, and the kids don't do any of that. And I brought up the fact that there's a neo-Nazi group who have been trying to take over this farmer's market, and they got kicked out, and that was ignored. And now everybody in town here is wondering, how could this happen? How could these Nazis be so entrenched that they could do this? And I keep thinking about the good Germans. Look it up if you don't know what a good German is. Okay, let's get on with what we have here. Curated here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Yeah. Oh, it's, of course, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. I shouldn't forget that. I got to put that in occasionally. Dan Desai Martin of Share Blue Media brings us this first offering. It looks like Georgia's absentee ballot law will have a disproportionate effect on minority voters, according to this lawsuit that's been filed against Georgia. A state with recent history of voter suppression is being sued over a new absentee ballot law that plaintiffs argue could disenfranchise tens of thousands of Georgia voters. The law is being challenged with a lawsuit filed this last Wednesday of this week by the Democratic Party of Georgia, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. Well, obviously, they don't have standing because they don't love Trump. If you're like a never Trumper or you hate Trump, you don't have legal standing to bring any lawsuits. Please. It's a new world order now. Okay. In the 2018 election, thousands of Georgia voters had their absentee ballot thrown out for technical reasons wholly unrelated to the voters' qualifications, according to the suit. The cause of this disenfranchisement is Georgia's standardless procedure for notifying absentee voters that their signatures are either missing or inconsistent, adding that the law disproportionately impacts African American and other minority voters, according to the suit. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that Georgia passed the absentee ballot law in March of this year to deal with the issues around rejecting mail-in ballots. The lawsuit filed on Wednesday claims this revised absentee voting law does not remedy the flaws in Georgia's absentee ballot regime and will not end the unconstitutional disenfranchisement of voters, end quote. The lawsuit argues that the new absentee ballot law failed to create a standardized method for election officials to deal with rejected mail-in ballots. Well, of course not. It has to be arbitrary. How else can you kick off minority voters, particularly African Americans, with impunity? If you have something standardized, you got to follow a rule. And rules just are not allowed anymore. According to the plaintiff's interpretation of the law, if election officials want to reject a mail-in ballot, the voter must be notified and has until 3 days after the election to contact election officials and cure the issue. However, the lawsuit claims that under this new law, each of Georgia's 159 counties is tasked with establishing its own deadline and method. Oh, how convenient. How efficient, too. As a result, the lawsuit claims that some counties could send letters by first-class mail, while others call or email voters. As a result, the lawsuit warns that some voters could fail to be notified with sufficient time to cure during the 3-day post-election period. Every Georgian should have a right to cast their vote and make sure it counts, Nikema Williams, the DPG chair, said in a statement about the lawsuit. Our elections need clear and fair standards to ensure that no one is disenfranchised and that no community is unfairly targeted. Georgia voters deserve nothing less, she said. Now, this is the second lawsuit targeting Georgia this month to voting issues in the state. On November 1st, a group including the DNC, the DCCC, DSCC, and the DPG sued the department over the order candidates are listed on the ballot. In Georgia, all Republicans running for any office, local, state, or federal, are listed first on the ballot because the governor is a Republican. Now, if it ever became possible that a Democrat would become governor, trust me, the Republicans will be first on the ballot because a Democrat is governor. They don't have standing. We're subhuman. We don't exist. Georgia could be a battleground state in the 2020 presidential election, and voters will head to the polls for 2 Senate races that could determine which party controls that chamber, in addition to House races and elections for state and local officials. And when they've seen the blue wave in the suburbs of America in the election just on Tuesday, they do not want people to vote. Dan Desai Martin of Share Blue Media brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Trump administration ignored the advice of State Department officials and may have let political calculations around the 2020 election influence its decision to try and end refugee protections for immigrants from Haiti, El Salvador, and Honduras. The revelations come from internal State Department documents obtained by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and a report by Democrats on that committee. In November of 2017, Trump tried to end the temporary protected status programs that had allowed approximately 400,000 citizens of the aforementioned countries to live and work in the United States following natural disasters or wars back home. At the time, a senior administration official justified the move by claiming the law was relatively explicit, that if the conditions on the ground do not support a TPS designation, the administration must terminate the TPS designation. However, prior to that decision, Thomas Shannon, the State Department's most senior Foreign Service official, wrote a memo stating that it is our purpose to provide the best possible foreign policy and diplomatic advice. From my point of view, that advice is obvious. Extend TPS for the countries indicated. The department, in internal documents, estimated that ending the programs would force more than 270,000 children who are U.S. citizens to become separated from their parents or return to El Salvador and Honduras. State Department officials worried the limited job opportunities could pressure children to become recruited by violent gangs like MS-13, according to the documents. In June of 2017, the head of the U.S. Embassy in Honduras, Heidi Fulton, wrote a memo stating that ending the TPS program would impose severe burdens on the Honduran government and be counterproductive to the U.S. interests. And I imagine the White House said, feature, not a bug. Emily Holden from High Country News brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A team of Trump administration advisors, consisting mostly of appointees from the private industry, are urging modernization of national park campgrounds with a vision of food trucks, Wi-Fi, and even Amazon drone and truck deliveries. How fun. Our recommendations will allow people to opt for additional costs if they want, for example, Amazon deliveries at a particular campsite. And that was Derek Crandall, Vice Chairman of the Made in America Outdoor Recreation Advisory Committee, told the Los Angeles Times. We want to let Americans make their own decisions in the marketplace. Okay. I didn't know that our national parks were mere commodities. The committee published its recommendations in a letter to the Interior Department last month. National park campgrounds are just one of many government resources that Trump has sought to privatize, including the U.S. Postal Service, as if that's not already a quasi-private organization. Or how about airports and freeways? Yes, the libertarian dream of a toll booth at every person's property line. Can you imagine driving up a street and you got to pay a toll to every homeowner on that street because they got a booth there and they have a right? The White House wants to reduce spending on National Park Service by 15%, or $481 million, even as the service has said it is facing more than $11 billion in a maintenance backlog. Crandall is counselor for the National Park Hospitality Association, which represents businesses that provide food, retail, and other services in parks. Other committee members include executives from Aramark and Delaware North. Oh, you know, the company that wanted to change the names of all the different parts of Yosemite. For instance, the Ahwahnee Hotel couldn't be called the Ahwahnee anymore. Tulumni Meadows had to change its name because Delaware North became the concessionaire. The committee said there is a broad consensus that the campground system operated by federal employees has inadequate and outmoded visitor infrastructure and needs more funding. Well, yeah. Overall capacity is not kept up with growth and challenges in camping demand, and the infrastructure that does exist, with few exceptions, fails to meet expectations of the contemporary camping market, the private advisory group said, calling U.S. national campgrounds an underperforming asset. How about giving up the $11 billion for the deferred maintenance that they've had to defer because you've been holding up the funding? An asset? That asset is not to go into concessionaires' pockets. That is to provide, a service so that people come and visit the parks and maintain the parks. Evidence suggests that occupancy rates at many campgrounds could grow, and additional services from Wi-Fi to utilities, equipment rentals and camp stores, food and extended family sites are desired and would sustainably boost net agency revenues, especially when operational costs are transferred to private sector partners, except for one thing. It never works. Look what happened when you gave up a public utility to a private company like PG&E. Yeah, it seems to work so well. National Park Service spokeswoman Stephanie Loeb said the panel was terminated last week and that no action has been taken on the committee's recommendations, and once the report is fully reviewed, we will respond as appropriate. Well, I'd like to respond in an appropriate way. No more advisory committees from privateers trying to take over our national monuments. Well, you know what? We better get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world. And we are going to finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Lord of the Flies meets Beasts of No Nation. Monos is one of those films where the backgrounds of the various characters remain shrouded. Indeed, we never know where the story is set, only that it's somewhere in the mountains and jungles of South America, and follows a group of FARC-like teenage guerrillas with names like Wolf, Rambo, and Boom Boom. They carry out the orders of their scary commander, who only shows up sporadically. Director Alejandro Landes never resolves how the teens ended up in their situation, although it's hinted that some of them may have been kidnapped. In any case, they're given the job of guarding an American captive known only as Doctora, who is being held for ransom. Doctora, played by Julianne Nicholson, speaks little Spanish and is often as lost as the audience. Left to their own devices, the kids are tasked with moving Doctora from a mountain base down to one in the jungle. More indoctrinated into a warped 21st century version of machismo than they are socialized, Monos quickly becomes reminiscent of the classic Lord of the Flies. There's even a pig's head. Monos is less about individuals or a specific event than it is about the concepts of humanity, especially developing humanity. When derailed, as in the case of child soldiers, Well, the title monos is the Spanish word for monkeys. Though the concept here may be less than original, this film reminds us of how thin the veneer of civilization can be. Nicholson performs notably as Doctora, especially given the little dialogue she has. The young actors bring off sweet to savage with skills past their years. Cinematographer Jasper Wolf's shooting juxtaposes the gorgeous with the brutal here to create an impactful film which is beautiful, harsh, and wild, and likely to stay with you. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Suzanne Bard. Anyone who commutes by car knows that traffic jams are an inevitable part of life. But humans are not alone in facing potential backups. Ants also commute between their nest and sources of food. The survival of their colonies depends on doing this efficiently.
The more they are, the more food they're going to bring back. But at the same time, they might end up with traffic jam because there are too many of them.
Arizona State University mathematician Sebastian Much. When humans commute, there's a point at which cars become dense enough to slow down the flow of traffic, causing gridlock. Much and his colleagues wanted to know if ants on the move could also get clogged. So they manipulated traffic density by constructing bridges of various widths between a colony of Argentine ants and a source of food. Then they waited and watched.
The goal was to try to find out at one point they're going to have a traffic jam. But it appears that never happened. They never at one point just stopped. They always managed to avoid traffic jam.
The flow of ants did increase initially as ants started to fill the bridge, and then leveled off at high densities. But it never slowed down, even when the bridge was nearly saturated with ants. The researchers then took a closer look at how the behavior of individual ants impacted traffic as a whole. That meant meticulously tracking thousands of separate ants as they made their way across the bridge. Much and his team found that when ants sense overcrowding, they adjust their speeds and avoid entering high-density areas, which prevents congestion. These behaviors may be facilitated by pheromones, chemicals that tell other ants where a trail is. The ants also manage to avoid colliding with each other at high densities, which could really slow them down. The study is in the journal eLife. Can ants help us solve our own traffic problems? Not likely, says Much. That's because when it comes to getting from point A to point B as fast as possible, human drivers put their own goals first. Individual ants have to be more cooperative in order to feed the colony, but the research could be useful in optimizing traffic flow for self-driving cars, which can be designed to be less like selfish humans and more like ants. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Suzanne Bard.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Gaines. As fall turns to winter, the flu season will be upon us in force. The best way to avoid influenza is to get immunized. Dr. Joe Brazee is a researcher with CDC's National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases. He's joining us today to discuss the importance of getting the flu vaccine. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you.
Joe, let's start with how long does the flu season last?
In general, flu seasons will last for several months in the United States at the national level. Each year it begins in the fall, usually peaks between January and March, and ends in the spring. But the timing of flu season is unpredictable, especially at the local level. So because we can't tell for sure when it will start, when it will peak, and when it will end in every community, we want to make sure that people get vaccinated as early as possible when the flu vaccines become available in the late summer and early fall.
Well, who should get vaccinated?
Everyone 6 months of age and older should get vaccinated against the flu each and every year. This is especially important for people at high risk of complications or severe flu if they get infected.
Which groups are at higher risk for complications from the flu?
Well, some people are at especially higher risk for severe flu or complications. These are people who are very young, like kids under 5 years of age, anybody 65 years and older, and people with underlying health disorders like heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease, or diseases of the immune system, and pregnant women.
Joe, how effective is the vaccine for preventing flu?
Well, vaccine is the single best way to protect you and your family from the flu each year. Most years, the vaccine reduces a person's chance of getting the flu and complications from the flu by about 50 to 70%. But how well it works can vary from season to season and by person. So remember that vaccine is one of 3 ways you can protect yourself against the flu. The other ones are good hygiene, like hand washing, covering your cough, staying home when you're sick, and finally, medications. There are medications that your doctor can prescribe to treat the flu if you get it.
Are there any side effects from getting vaccinated?
Well, there are 2 types of flu vaccines. First, the shots. The most common side effects with the flu shots are soreness or redness in your arm for a day or 2 after getting the vaccine. The nasal spray vaccines can cause runny nose or congestion or low-grade fever in some people for, again, about a day or 2 after getting the vaccine. So these side effects are mild compared with the disease itself, which causes hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations and tens of thousands of deaths each year in the United States. Remember that the vaccine is the safest and most effective way to prevent flu each and every year.
Joe, where can listeners get more information about the flu vaccine?
We'll go to cdc.gov/flu.
Thanks, Joe. I've been talking today with CDC's Dr. Joe Brazee about the annual flu vaccine. Remember, everyone 6 months and older should be vaccinated. To get your annual flu vaccine, see your healthcare provider or go to a pharmacy, grocery store, or clinic in your area. If you get influenza, talk with your healthcare provider right away about antiviral medication. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Robert Gaines for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1892. That was the day that black and white workers in New Orleans began what is considered the first integrated general strike in United States history. The strike began when the New Orleans Board of Trade refused to enter into an agreement with the Teamsters Union because it included black members. The Teamsters were part of what was known as the Triple Alliance. The other 2 groups in the alliance were the Scalesmen and the Packers unions. The Board of Trade had settled contracts with those 2, mostly white unions. The refusal to bargain with the Teamsters set a wave of anger through the New Orleans labor movement. Labor was on the march in New Orleans in 1892. That May, streetcar workers had won union recognition after a successful strike. The American Federation of Labor had spent the year organizing throughout the city. One emphasis of the organizing drive was interracial labor cooperation. Workers were ready to let their voices be heard. The general strike was called and grew to include between 20 and 25,000 workers. Trade unions, musicians, and shoe clerks joined the strike. Even some of the unions that had already won contracts, including the streetcar workers, walked off the job in solidarity. The central demand was union recognition. The mayor of New Orleans refused to deploy his police force to stop the strikers, but the governor threatened armed intervention. Faced with that threat, the strike ended on November 11th. The workers gained some wage increases. but did not win union recognition. And in retribution for their solidarity, the streetcar workers lost the contract they had won earlier that year. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Impeachment investigators on Thursday released the transcripts of State Department official George Kent's testimony, in which he told investigators that he took notes about specific conversations he'd witnessed related to Donald Trump's attempted quid pro quo with Ukraine. According to the transcript, Kent told of multiple times when he told other government officials about his grave concerns about the White House's efforts to have Ukraine launch investigations into Burisma Holdings and a conspiracy theory about alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. Kent said, quote, POTUS wanted nothing less than President Zelensky to go to the microphone and say, investigations, Biden, and Clinton. Basically, there needed to be 3 words in the message, and that was the shorthand. Kent and the top American diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor, are the first witnesses scheduled to testify when the public phase of the impeachment inquiry begins on Wednesday. Late Thursday, House investigators subpoenaed Mick Mulvaney, the acting White House chief of staff, demanding that he testify Friday morning about his knowledge of Trump's decision to withhold military aid to Ukraine. Mulvaney had already said he probably would refuse lawmakers' demands to testify, and the White House has issued a blanket order against cooperating with the inquiry. But Mulvaney's October 17th press conference, in which he said Trump withheld nearly $400 million in aid, in part to get Ukraine to initiate investigations against Trump's political rivals, a comment he later walked back, has fueled Democrats' impeachment push. From the "you've got to be kidding me" files, according to a spokesman for former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, he, quote, believes that Donald Trump represents an unprecedented threat to our nation and that, quote, the current field of candidates is not well positioned to defeat him. So, Michael Bloomberg plans to file for access to the Alabama ballot before Friday's deadline. Deadlines for filing for additional state ballots are coming up. Although Bloomberg has allegedly not made a final decision yet, critics note that he spent over $100 million during his last mayoral bid and has the resources to spend exponentially more on a nationwide campaign. To further frustrate us, the Washington Post's Eugene Robinson tweeted Thursday, quote, I hear from a good source that Eric Holder has been consulting strategists about possibly jumping into the Dem presidential race. For those who need refreshing, Holder was Obama's first attorney general. In other news, Donald Trump was ordered by the New York State Supreme Court to pay $2 million in damages to nonprofit groups as part of a settlement of a 2018 civil lawsuit filed by the state's attorney general's office against him, his 3 eldest children, and the Trump Foundation, alleging that he used his charity's funds for personal and political means, violating campaign finance law. The dispute centered on $2.8 million raised by the since-shuttered foundation at an Iowa fundraiser for military veterans during the 2016 campaign. Trump reacted on Thursday night on Twitter, arguing that New York Attorney General Letitia James is, quote, deliberately mischaracterizing this settlement for political purposes. He went on to tweet, I am the only person I know, perhaps the only person in history, who can give major money to charity, $19 million, charge no expense, and be attacked by political hacks in New York State. No wonder why we are all leaving. Ugh. Appearing as a guest on the network Thursday, CNN host Fareed Zakaria said he was set to interview Ukrainian President Zelensky. Quote, we had been negotiating with President Zelensky in his office for a while, for months, trying to get an interview with him anyway, ever since he was elected president. Once news of the whistleblower's complaint surfaced, he said, it became clear to us that the interview was off. A warning is coming November 19th. A Warning is the title of the forthcoming book by Anonymous, the same person who penned a New York Times op-ed last year, I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration. According to the first excerpts we've seen, a warning is an appropriate title. Rachel Maddow Thursday night read a few extensive passages that were truly chilling. Although we thought we knew these things about Trump, it's alarming to hear these revelations from someone who was ostensibly in the room when they happened. Here's one example.
Early on, briefers were told not to send lengthy documents. Trump wouldn't read them. Nor should they bring summaries to the Oval Office. If they must bring paper, then PowerPoint was preferred because he's a visual learner. Okay, that's fine, many thought to themselves. Leaders like to absorb information in different ways. Then officials were told that PowerPoint decks needed to be slimmed down. The president couldn't digest too many slides. He needed more images to keep his interest and fewer words. Then they were told to cut back the overall message on complicated issues such as military readiness or the federal budget to just 3 main points. That was still too much. Soon, West Wing aides were exchanging best practices for success in the Oval Office. The most salient advice? Forget the 3 points. Come in with 1 main point and repeat it over and over again, even if the president inevitably goes off on tangents. Repeat it until he gets it. Just keep steering the subject back to it. 1 point, just that 1 point, because you cannot focus the commander-in-chief's attention on more than one gosh darn thing over the course of a meeting, okay? Some officials refused to believe this is how it worked. Are you serious, they asked? Quizzing others who briefed the president? How could they dumb down their work to this level? They were facilitating presidential decisions on major issues, not debates about where to go out for dinner. I saw a number of appointees as they dismissed the advice of wizened hands and went in to see President Trump, prepared for robust policy discussion on momentous national topics and a peppery give and take. Those people invariably paid the price. What the F is this? The president would shout, looking at a document one of them handed him. These are just words, a bunch of words. It doesn't mean anything. Sometimes he would throw the papers back on the table. He definitely wouldn't read them.
And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Explore the site at NicoleSandler.com, and I hope you'll click on the donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Hey, we're supposed to be in the mid to upper 40s on these overnight lows. What the heck? We are slated for a high of about 73 to 75 today, mainly sunny. Winds will remain light and variable as they have been. Tonight we should have a low, they say, in the mid to upper 40s, a few passing clouds. Winds, of course, will remain light and variable tonight and for the foreseeable future, though we are having a small increase in the possibility of precipitation, which we would love indeed. Ragweed pollen is rated low. The air quality index is moderate at 54 parts per million, and that air stagnation warning remains in effect locally. The daytime UV index is at a seasonal low of 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.21 inches. Visibility is down to 6 miles, and relative humidity is at 84%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 47 and cloudy. Paris is 62 and partly cloudy. Rome is 60 and partly cloudy. Kiev is 49 degrees and cloudy. Kabul, 44 and fair. Hong Kong is 67 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 58 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 58 and fair. San Francisco, California is 51 with fog. And New York is 39 degrees Fahrenheit and partly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Alistair Smout and Elizabeth Keelford of Reuters bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. An international grand committee of lawmakers called for a pause on online micro-targeted political ads with false or misleading information until the area is regulated. The committee, formed to investigate disinformation gathered in Dublin to hear evidence from Facebook Inc., Twitter Inc., and Alphabet Inc.'s Google and other experts about online harms, hate speech, and electoral interference. The meeting was attended by lawmakers from Australia, Finland, Estonia, Georgia, Singapore, the UK, and the United States. The committee's inaugural session in London last November featured an empty chair for Mark Zuckerberg after he declined to be questioned. Facebook has been under scrutiny in recent weeks over its decision to not fact-check ads run by politicians, which intensified when rival Twitter announced that it would ban all political ads. Zuckerberg has defended this policy, saying that the company does not want to stifle political speech.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A Moscow court has ruled to dissolve an indigenous people's rights group, the second decision of its kind in less than a week that was criticized by European authorities. Known as the Center for Support of Indigenous Peoples of the North, the non-governmental organization was branded a foreign agent in 2015 for having received funding from abroad. The designation was later removed after the center renounced foreign funding. But a court ruling on Wednesday ordered the dissolution of the nearly 20-year-old group over allegations it broke Russia's laws on NGOs. Rights groups and other organizations designated by the Russian Justice Ministry as foreign agents, a term that carries a negative Soviet-era connotation, can be subjected to spot checks and face bureaucratic scrutiny. Russian law requires foreign agent groups to submit regular reports on their funding, on their objectives, on how they spend their money, and who their managers are. It added that the ruling attested to the open pressure on the organization and its leadership, and the Russian Justice Ministry did not immediately reply to a request for comment. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on, and we're going to meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here on Monday, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.